Deep in the humid, tangled heart of the Central American jungle, where ancient saber trees rise like pillars into the sky and vines coil around forgotten stones, there persists a story whispered from one generation to the next, a story about a place called Axtomal. Some say it was once a thriving Maya city, larger than Tikal and older than Palenque, a center of wisdom where astronomer priests studied the turning of the heavens and guarded secrets about the nature of time itself. Others claim that Axtomal never truly vanished but instead slipped into another layer of existence, hiding just beyond the reach of ordinary senses. For centuries, explorers, shamans, and even passing hunters have spoken about strange events in the region, the sudden echo of distant drums on windless nights, the sound of chanting that seems to come from beneath the earth, and the eerie sensation that the woods themselves are alive, watching, waiting, and remembering. The legend does not begin with clear maps or carved stones. It begins with the feeling of being followed by footsteps that disappear when one turns around, with the sight of flickering lights drifting among the trees like floating embers, and with the deep silence that settles over the jungle right before something inexplicable happens. Local villagers describe the area around Axtomal as a place where time bends and flows in unpredictable ways. Travelers have returned from short walks claiming they had been gone for hours, while others swear entire days passed in what felt like moments. A few speak of losing their sense of direction entirely, as though the forest gently rearranged itself behind them. Old storytellers insist that this distortion of time is not a curse but a protection, something woven long ago by Maya priests who feared the destruction of their sacred knowledge. They say that Axtomal was not swallowed by vegetation or ruined by war. Instead, it chose to withdraw from the human world. In the early 20th century, a handful of explorers ventured into the area with the hope of finding ruins buried under thick layers of soil and roots. But instead of falling upon temples or stelae, they found themselves facing an overwhelming sensation that reality had grown thin. One explorer wrote in his journal that he felt as if he had stepped behind the curtain of the world. And when he returned, he was unable to explain why his watch had stopped while the sun had moved far across the sky. Another, a young cartographer, claimed that though he walked in a straight line, the forest led him in a perfect circle 3 times in a row before releasing him. Stories like these spread quickly, and soon the name Axtomal was spoken only in hushed tones, as though saying it too loudly would awaken something ancient. Yet the most curious part of the legend is not the strange sounds or the lost sense of time, but the unwavering belief among the Maya communities living nearby that Axtomal still exists. They say it has not been destroyed, rather, it has retreated into a breathing place between worlds, remaining intact in a realm where human eyes rarely wander. Elders say that the jungle does not guard the city out of malice but out of duty. According to them, Axtomal contains teachings about the cycles of time, cycles so powerful that they could reshape a person's understanding of existence. If such knowledge fell into the wrong hands, chaos would spread across the world. So the city sleeps, unseen and untouched, until the moment it decides to reveal itself again. Those who have come close to discovering Axtomal often describe a strange awareness, as if the city is not simply lost but is choosing its visitors intentionally. The forest seems to test those who enter it, pushing away the reckless and welcoming the humble. There are tales of individuals who wandered only a few steps off the beaten path and suddenly found themselves standing before structures that could not be seen moments earlier, massive stone walls half illuminated by shafts of sunlight, doorways carved with spirals symbolizing the endless turning of time, and stairways leading upward into the canopy as if pointing toward a different sky. When they blinked, the vision vanished, leaving nothing but empty forest and the distant call of birds. To this day, no one can say for certain whether Axtomal is a physical city waiting to be uncovered, a spiritual realm accessible only through altered states of perception, or a metaphor created by ancient minds to protect a wisdom too deep for common understanding. What is clear, however, is that the legend continues to grow, drawing curious souls from around the world who long to find what lies hidden beyond the curtain of time. And so, the mystery of Axtomal remains, a city swallowed not by vines, not by soil, but by the shifting fabric of reality itself, guarding its secrets as patiently as the jungle that surrounds it. The story of Uxtomal does not survive through complete records or well-preserved manuscripts, but through fragments, pieces scattered like broken pottery. Across centuries, historians, linguists, and Maya elders agree on one point: whatever Uxtomal once was, it left behind traces that do not behave like ordinary ruins. In several codices that survived the fires of the conquistadors, there are cryptic references to a city of returning suns, a place where the keepers of time gathered during rare celestial alignments. These lines never mention Uxtomal by name, but they describe a region of dense forest, a land of limestone caves and underground rivers, exactly the landscape surrounding the area where modern explorers claim the city once stood. The codices speak of priests who stepped between cycles and used spiral symbols to represent the flow of time not as a straight line but as a living, breathing circle. It is this spiral motif that appears carved on abandoned markers found deep in the jungle, stones barely visible under moss yet still radiating a sense of purpose. Local Maya families who have lived in the region for generations insist that their ancestors spoke of Uxtomal with both reverence and caution. They describe it as a city that was never conquered, never destroyed, and never truly forgotten. Instead, it was protected, not by walls or by warriors, but by the very forces it studied. Elders say that long before the arrival of any outside power, the priest-astronomers of Uxtomal sensed a shift in the world, an approaching imbalance that threatened to tear apart the harmony between human life and the cosmic order. To preserve their knowledge, they performed rituals meant to bend the shadow of time, creating a veil that would hide the city from those who sought its power for selfish reasons. Whether this was a spiritual metaphor or an actual phenomenon is still debated, but the belief persists that Uxtomal slipped out of sync with the timeline of the world, existing now like a ghost city humming beneath the surface of reality. What gives credibility to these legends are the artifacts recovered from the region, artifacts that seem older than comparable objects from well-known Maya sites. In the 1960s, a team of archaeologists found a cluster of stone pillars unlike anything documented in nearby ruins. Each pillar bore carvings of concentric circles spiraling inward, intersected by what looked like pathways or channels. The patterns were too precise to be random decoration, and when mapped, they resembled astronomical charts, possibly tracking the cycles of Venus, the Sun, and even long count periods far beyond the typical inscriptions found elsewhere. One researcher noticed that several of the symbols did not appear in any known Maya dictionary, suggesting either a localized writing system or a type of ceremonial code used only by the priests of Uxtomal. The pillars themselves were arranged in a pattern almost too perfect to be coincidental, aligning with the sunrise during the solstices and marking lunar phases with uncanny accuracy. It was as though the creators of these stones were not merely tracking time but interacting with it. Nearby villagers have long warned outsiders not to disturb the region where these artifacts were found. According to them, the land does not tolerate disrespect. Those who approach the area with greed or arrogance often become disoriented, unable to find their way back. Stories circulate of hunters who chased deer deep into the forest only to find themselves surrounded by silence so absolute it felt unnatural. When they finally emerged, their families claimed they had been gone far longer than they believed. One elder recalls a relative who walked into the forest at dawn and returned at what he thought was mid-morning, only to discover that the sun had already set. When asked where he had been, he could only say that he followed a path lined with carved stones, stones that his companions later insisted did not exist. In addition to the physical clues, oral traditions continue to preserve memories of the city's purpose. Some versions describe Uxtomal as a sanctuary for scholars and spiritual practitioners who were entrusted with guarding the sacred understanding of time. They studied the cycles of creation and destruction, believing that every era of the world was shaped by the movement of celestial bodies and the moral condition of humanity. In this worldview, the distortion of time reported by modern explorers is not an accident but a lingering echo of the rituals once performed there. It is said that the priests sought harmony with the universe by entering states of deep meditation inside caves, places where the boundary between worlds thinned. In these chambers, they visualized the flow of time not as a river but as a woven net. Threads crossing and looping endlessly. By understanding these threads, they believed one could glimpse the past or sense the future. What is particularly mysterious is that no known conquering force ever mentioned a campaign against Axtomal. In a region where kingdoms constantly rose and fell, it is strange that a major city would vanish from history without a trace of warfare, famine, or rebellion. There are no accounts of its decline, no stories of its kings, and no genealogies linking it to other Maya dynasties. It is as if the city existed for a purpose so specialized and sacred that it isolated itself not only physically but historically. Scholars often point out that the absence of information can be just as telling as the presence of it. If Axtomal was intentionally erased from the shared memory of the region, it might have been done with ritual intention, to protect a powerful knowledge or to prevent outsiders from misusing what the city had learned. Taken together, these fragments paint a picture not of a lost settlement swallowed by the jungle, but of a city built around a profound understanding of time and existence. The codices, the carved pillars, the warnings from local communities, all suggest that Axtomal was more than a place where people lived. It was a spiritual gateway, a center of esoteric knowledge, and perhaps even a location where the fabric of time itself was studied and shaped. Whether the city truly stepped into another dimension or simply faded from human awareness through deliberate ritual, the clues left behind indicate one truth: Axtomal was not like other Maya cities. It was something far older, deeper, and more mysterious, waiting silently for the moment when someone worthy might find it again. Stories of Axtomal might have remained nothing more than legends told around fires if not for the unsettling testimonies of those who ventured into the region and returned changed, confused, shaken, or unable to explain what they had witnessed. Over the last century, a scattered collection of journals, interviews, field reports, and personal accounts has formed a mosaic of experiences so bizarre that even seasoned researchers hesitate to dismiss them entirely. These are not stories of dramatic discoveries or towering temples but of subtle encounters. Of moments where explorers felt reality slip just a little out of their grasp, as though the jungle itself was breathing in a rhythm separate from their own heartbeat. One of the earliest and most cited accounts came from an expedition in the 1920s led by a Guatemalan surveyor named Emilio Vargas. He set out with a small team to map sections of forest near the Rio Bravo and expected nothing more unusual than dense vegetation and long days. But after hiking deeper into the wilderness, his group began to hear sounds that had no logical source. Vargas wrote that on the third night, long after his team had set up camp, they heard the unmistakable beat of ceremonial drums. The rhythm was slow at first, like a pulse echoing through the trees, then gradually faster, accompanied by what sounded like chanting in a dialect none of them recognized. The men assumed it was a local village performing a festival and tried to sleep. But the next morning, when they traced the direction of the sound, they found no footprints, no paths, and no sign of human activity. The drums had seemed so close, yet the forest was untouched, pristine, as if nothing living had passed through for years. Vargas later wrote in his journal that the sound carried with it a strange familiarity, as though it stirred a memory he did not possess. Decades later, in the 1950s, a young American researcher named Harriet Lewin traveled to the region to study local flora. She was skeptical of anything supernatural, trained strictly in the scientific method, yet her report became one of the most disturbing accounts ever documented. One afternoon, while searching for medicinal plants, she noticed a faint orange glow between the trees, like the flicker of torchlight. Curious, she approached. As she got closer, she heard the soft crackle of fire and what sounded like voices speaking in a slow, melodic cadence. Believing she had stumbled upon an unlisted community, she pushed through the brush, only to find nothing there. The light vanished instantly, and the forest plunged back into silence. But the strangest part was not the disappearance of the light. When she checked her watch, she realized that nearly 4 hours had passed, even though she was certain she had only been gone for 20 minutes. Her colleagues confirmed that she had been missing for most of the afternoon, and her sense of time had simply disintegrated during the encounter. For the rest of her life, Lewin refused to discuss the incident in detail, saying only that the jungle had felt aware, as though it watched her with a patient intelligence. Another story, rarely mentioned publicly, comes from a local hunter named Call, who claimed he once saw an entire stone structure appear and then dissolve in front of his eyes. He explained that he had been tracking a wounded animal at dusk when he emerged into a clearing filled with shafts of orange sunlight. There, standing silently between two towering trees, was a wall of finely carved stone. It bore the same spiral pattern seen on the artifacts believed to be linked to Uxtomal. The carvings were so detailed he could make out lines as thin as a strand of hair, depicting pathways that merged, crossed, and looped in dizzying patterns. He stepped closer, reaching out to touch the cold stone surface. But before his fingers made contact, a gust of wind moved through the clearing, bending the light in a way he had never seen. The shadow of a cloud passed overhead, and in that instant the wall seemed to ripple like the surface of water, breaking apart into shimmering fragments before melting back into the forest. When the moment passed, only trees remained. Call ran home that night and refused to return to that part of the forest for many years. Perhaps the most intriguing account comes from a small group of students from Guatemala City who, during the late 1980s, attempted to retrace the path of a rumored ancient road. They were inexperienced but enthusiastic, driven by a fascination with Maya archaeology. After hiking for 2 days, they found themselves strangely disoriented. The compass needle spun uselessly, pointing not north but in a slow circle. At night, they witnessed lights moving among the trees, soft, glowing orbs that drifted between branches without illuminating the ground. On the 4th morning, one student awoke before the others and wandered away from the camp, drawn by a faint singing voice. He later said the voice felt like it was inside his chest rather than in his ears. He followed it until he reached what he described as a gate of shadows, formed by 2 jagged limestone rocks leaning together. Just beyond these rocks, he thought he saw the silhouette of a large step pyramid. He called out, but the air felt thick, heavy, as though sound itself was being swallowed. When he blinked, the pyramid vanished, and the forest became ordinary again. His companions found him an hour later, trembling and unable to fully articulate what he had seen. While modern explorers try to rationalize these events, blaming exhaustion, heat, or hallucination, there are too many similarities across accounts to ignore. People describe the same drums, the same flickering lights, the same sensation of time stretching or collapsing around them. They speak of paths that appear only to disappear moments later, of carved stones that materialize out of nowhere, of voices that call by name even though no one is present. These phenomena give the impression that Uxtomal is not simply hidden but alive in a way that defies ordinary comprehension. It seems to reveal itself in fragments, one wall here, a light there, a whisper in the dark, like a city testing anyone who approaches, showing only what it chooses to show. In recent years, some researchers have speculated that the distortions may be caused by underground cave systems, mineral deposits, or unusual electromagnetic fields common in limestone regions. But these explanations fail to account for the consistency and depth of the experiences. A growing number of anthropologists believe the stories reflect a cultural memory embedded in the land itself, a kind of spiritual imprint left by generations of rituals and cosmic studies. Others entertain the more radical idea that the city exists in a state of partial overlap with the physical world, visible only at certain moments, under certain conditions, or to certain people. Whatever the truth may be, the stories of explorers form the living heartbeat of the Uxtomal mystery. They remind us that some places resist being understood, that the world still holds corners where the boundary between what is real and what is possible grows thin. And in those corners, time behaves strangely, as though it is waiting for something, or someone, to rediscover what was lost. Among the many layers of mystery surrounding Uxtomal, none is more compelling, or more guarded, than the belief that the city still exists but remains invisible to most of humanity. This idea is not merely poetic metaphor or superstition, it is a conviction passed down among Maya elders with a seriousness that suggests deep cultural memory. They claim that Axtomal was never meant to be discovered by every traveler who wandered into the forest. Instead, it was a sanctuary designed to reveal itself only to individuals whose minds and spirits resonated with the city's purpose. According to the old teachings, Axtomal exists in a place between breaths, a sacred realm that overlaps with the physical world but does not fully belong to it. To cross into this realm, one must be chosen, not by arbitrary destiny, but by the state of one's inner self. In whispered stories told during gatherings or ceremonies, there is a recurring theme. Those who display fear, arrogance, or greed will walk in circles forever, trapped in illusions the forest conjures to protect the city. But those whose hearts are quiet, whose intentions are pure, and whose minds are free of worldly hunger may find themselves stepping through an invisible threshold. Elders describe this threshold not as a doorway carved in stone but as a shift in perception, as subtle as passing from sunlight into shade. One moment, a person walks through ordinary jungle. The next, without warning, the air changes, becomes warmer or cooler, lighter or heavier, wilder. Familiar sounds of the forest fade. It is only later that the traveler realizes they have crossed into the echo of Axtomal, a place where time folds in on itself and walls shimmer as if reflecting memories rather than sunlight. There is a legend, rarely discussed with outsiders, that the priests of Axtomal foresaw great cycles of suffering that would sweep across the world: wars, famine, spiritual decline, and the gradual loss of humanity's connection to cosmic rhythms. To protect their understanding, they hid the city not by burying it under earth, but by shifting it along what they called the threads of becoming, a concept suggesting that existence is woven from multiple layers of reality. In their teachings, every world contains shadows of another, and if one knows how to listen, these shadows speak through dreams, intuition, and symbolic visions. Those with the ability to hear these whispers are sometimes described as chosen, but not in the sense of preordained destiny. Instead, the chosen ones are those who cultivate qualities that resonate with the city's spiritual frequency: patience, humility, openness, and a willingness to see beyond the surface of things. Stories abound of individuals who unknowingly carried these qualities. One tale speaks of a wandering healer who entered the forest simply to gather herbs. She was said to have stumbled upon a stone staircase rising through the canopy, illuminated by golden light. She felt no fear, only calm recognition, as though she had arrived somewhere she had always known. As she climbed the stairs, she heard murmured voices, not threatening but welcoming, like the gentle hum of prayer. When she reached the top, she found herself overlooking a city of shimmering structures, their edges soft as though made of mist. But before she could step forward, a great silence fell, and the vision dissolved into the forest. For years afterward, she insisted she had been allowed a glimpse not as a reward, but as a reminder that the world contains many realities layered atop one another. Another story tells of a young boy who wandered too far while chasing fireflies at dusk. His parents searched frantically, fearing jaguars or steep ravines, but the boy returned just before dawn. He claimed he had followed the fireflies to a clearing where people made of light stood around a stone pool. They did not speak but communicated with him through images and feelings, showing him scenes of the stars moving across the sky and cycles of darkness followed by great renewal. When his parents questioned him, he described architectural details that matched no known ruins but bore striking resemblance to the spirals and patterns associated with Axtomal. Elders later said the boy had been allowed to enter because his mind had not yet hardened into the rigid structures adults carry. He moved through the world with curiosity and wonder, qualities the city recognized. Central to the legend is the idea that Axtomal's appearance is tied closely to celestial events. During certain alignments, solstices, equinoxes, eclipses, the boundary between worlds thins. For a brief moment, the city becomes easier to see, like a reflection on water when the wind momentarily stills. Some believe this is why explorers often report unusual phenomena near dawn or dusk. Times of natural transition. It is during these thresholds that reality seems to soften, allowing glimpses of the city's presence. Yet even during these moments, only those aligned with Extomal's purpose can cross fully into its realm. Others may encounter fragments, lights, voices, geometric shadows, but the city will remain hidden. A deeper, more mysterious part of the legend involves a prophecy that speaks of a time when the world will enter a cycle of profound imbalance. In this era, the teachings preserved in Extomal will be needed to restore harmony. According to the prophecy, the city will call upon a group of individuals scattered across the world, not kings, not scholars, not warriors, but ordinary people who carry within them the quiet strength of awareness. These chosen ones will find themselves drawn to the jungle without knowing why, and the city will reveal itself to them as clearly as the rising sun. The priests of Extomal, it is said, left behind a message encoded in the spirals carved on stone: when the shadow grows long, the guardians shall return. Whether this refers to the chosen individuals or to the city itself is unclear. What becomes evident when listening to these stories is that Extomal is portrayed less as a physical place and more as a living consciousness, a guardian entity that chooses when and to whom it appears. Some elders describe it as a teacher city, a place that awakens only when a student is ready. It demands not offerings or worship, but sincerity. To enter, one must let go of fear, ambition, and attachment to linear time. The chosen ones, therefore, are not selected by fate but by their willingness to step outside the narrow confines of ordinary perception and embrace the deeper truth that time is not a line but a circle, ever turning, ever renewing. In this way, the legend of the chosen ones offers not just a supernatural explanation but a philosophical one. It suggests that Extomal symbolizes a state of consciousness, a bridge between worlds that anyone can access if they cultivate clarity of mind and openness of heart. Whether the city exists physically or spiritually becomes less important than the transformation required to perceive it. And so the myth endures, Extomal remains unseen to most, waiting patiently in the folds of time for those rare individuals who can step through the invisible veil and witness its shimmering reality. When dawn finally returned to the jungle, it did so timidly, as though the sky itself feared waking the ancient forces slumbering beneath the temples. The light poured across the mist like a reluctant traveler, revealing the city of Palenque in a quiet, breath-holding stillness. Elena stepped out into the soft morning air, her mind heavy with everything she had witnessed beneath the ruins. The walls no longer whispered, the glyphs no longer glowed, and the chamber that had once held the beating heart of Maya knowledge now felt impossibly distant, as if it existed in a different layer of reality. Yet the weight of her experience lingered like a warm pulse behind her ribs, a faint reminder that what she had seen was no dream. She knew the Maya had left this world with secrets far more profound than modern historians dared imagine, and she had become a reluctant bearer of one of their most guarded truths. She sat on a stone ledge overlooking the forest canopy, watching the fog dissolve into threads of silver. Every now and then, the faint outline of Pakal's mask shimmered in her memory, the jade eyes burning with an ancient intelligence. The Maya had believed time was a living being, breathing and shifting through cycles, folding and unfolding like a serpent coiling through eternity. Elena felt as though she had stepped into one of those coils, caught between the world she knew and the world they had perceived. The dormant celestial chamber, the resonant heartbeat from the sarcophagus lid, the star map etched with impossible precision, all of it hinted at a truth that stretched beyond archaeology, beyond history, beyond anything she had ever allowed herself to believe. Yet the jungle itself seemed unchanged, indifferent to her awakening. Birds called out from the high branches, insects hummed their ancient songs, and the ruins stood quietly as they had for centuries, eroding grain by grain under the slow patience of time. A part of her wondered whether the entire encounter had been permitted only because she had listened, not as a scientist, but as a human being willing to feel the weight of a civilization's soul. Perhaps that was what the Maya had always wanted, not to be solved like a puzzle, but to be heard like a voice carried across the centuries. She traced her fingers across the notebook on her lap, blank pages waiting to be filled. But for the first time in her life, Elena hesitated. Could she write the truth? Would the world even believe a story that defied every rule of physical reality? And if they did, should they? The chamber had revealed itself to her alone, and only when the final echo of the cosmic alignment stirred the sleeping mechanism. She sensed that the Maya had not built it for everyone, but for those who could approach their knowledge with humility rather than hunger. Revealing. Everything might awaken an old hunger in the modern world, one driven by technology, power, exploitation. She felt an unspoken warning in her chest: some knowledge is meant to be protected, not exposed. Still, she could not leave Palenque empty-handed. Something within her insisted that she carry forward at least a fragment of what she had witnessed. Maybe the true legacy of the Maya was not the mechanism or the secret chamber, but the message encoded within the final vision, that time is not a straight line but a living cycle, and humanity is not drifting helplessly through it, but participating in its breath. The celestial forces that guided the ancient Maya still moved, still sang, still shaped the rhythm of the universe. Their understanding had not vanished. It had simply slipped into silence, waiting for those who could hear it. As the sun finally broke free of the horizon, Elena rose to her feet. The temple behind her glowed faintly under the golden light, as though acknowledging her decision. She knew she could not remain in the jungle forever. The world outside was waiting, unaware of how close it stood to a truth older than its own memory. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warm air fill her lungs, grounding herself in this turning point between two eras. Somewhere deep inside the ruins, she could almost feel the faint hum of the mechanism settling into sleep again, like a cosmic heart slowing its beat until the next convergence thousands of years from now. On her way back down the moss-covered steps, she paused one last time and looked back at the entrance to the temple. The shadows within seemed to shift gently, as if an invisible presence watched her departure. But there was no fear now, only a quiet understanding. She whispered a soft thank you in the still air, her voice trembling with reverence. It was not just gratitude for survival, but for being allowed to witness a fragment of a civilization's soul that refused to die. When she reached the forest floor, a sudden breeze rustled the trees, carrying with it the faintest echo, so soft she wondered if she imagined it. It sounded like the low, rhythmic pulse she had heard inside the chamber, now fading into the distance like a heartbeat returning to its slumber. She stood still, letting it wash over her until it dissolved completely. Then she turned toward the path leading out of Palenque, stepping forward into the world of the present with the weight of an ancient world resting gently on her shoulders. She did not know whether humanity was ready for the truth she carried. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: the Maya had not disappeared. Their voice still lived in the stones, in the stars, and now, quietly, fiercely, within her. And someday, when time curled back on itself and the next cycle awakened, their secrets would rise again. Not as ruins, not as mysteries, but as a reminder that no civilization ever truly vanishes. Its echoes travel through the fabric of time, waiting for the moment when the world remembers how to listen.